Hi everyone, I'm Tally, this is Farrell, and we're bored of it. And welcome to our review of Shasn, the political area control game, which sums it up pretty nicely. Prepare for some pretty intense table talk and some solid animosity between the players.
Just what we like. So, in Shasn, you are taking on the role of politicians in the middle of an election. You're vying over voters, and unfortunately for you, voters are very fickle. But kind of positively for you, politicians don't fight fair. So it's going to be a very brutal struggle. Please note that before we get into how to play and what we think, we were sent this for review by the publisher. And also please consider clicking on the bell icon to be notified when our videos go out. As we've mentioned in our previous videos, the YouTube algorithm is hurting a lot of channels right now. It's not pushing videos out to anyone, particularly our subscribers. So being notified will really help us and let you know that we have content out. Thanks.
Shasn is based around campaigns such as UK 2019 to 2020 Brexit or USA 2022 to 2023. These decks flavour your campaigns, putting you in situations or dealing with questions relating to the issues of this period.
On their turn, a player will begin by being read an ideology card. Now, these will pose a political question to the player, and that political question will match the campaign you're playing to some degree. So in this one, it's the Brexit campaign. And this question here that I have in my hand is asking, would you support a campaign to return historic treasures to their countries of origin? Now, pretty much all of the cards will have one side that says yes, one side that says no, with a kind of comically flamboyant or outrageous kind of way of writing that answer. And in this game, there are 4 ideologies that loose representations of certain ideologies in real life, such as capitalism or the idealist, and answers kind of lean into, it's all about the money, or it's all about kind of making the world a better place. And each side of this card will be one of those ideologies. And based on which answer you pick, you'll then have a card of that ideology, and you'll get resources, for the most part, matching that ideology. As you collect more cards of the same ideology, you will grow stronger, I guess, in the sense of the word, in that you'll unlock powers. So at the beginning, you'll start generating more resources of that type. Then you'll be able to manipulate resources in some way. And finally, when you have 5 cards of one type, you get a level 5 power. And these will let you manipulate voters, particularly voters who previously kind of weren't able to be manipulated. So they are very strong.
Mainly, you'll spend these resources on voters, but there are some other things you can spend them on, like conspiracy cards, which give you a big one-time power. Voters will go onto the main board with the aim of filling up enough spaces in a region that you have the majority. When voters are not in the majority, they are easy to be messed with, but majority voters are harder to manipulate. That is until level 5 ideology powers come into play.
For example, the most common form of voter manipulation is gerrymandering, which you have gerrymandering rights if you have the most voters in a region. Then you can move one voter in or out of that region or amongst adjacent regions. But crucially, you're not allowed to move majority voters. Now, majority voters is a term given when one player on their own has reached a kind of majority in a single region. So these are kind of pre-printed on the board. So for example, this has 11 spaces, and when one player has 6 spaces, they become the kind of majority party, and their voters flip to the other side, marking them as majority voters. Now, these are important for the end game because the game will end once all regions have majority voters, and these are the only things that matter in terms of scoring. At the end of the game, every majority voter is worth 1 point, so players just count up the majority voters they have across the entire board and see who wins. Shasn is a strange beast, and I've seen it described as kind of half party game, half strategy area control game. And although I can see where people are coming from, I don't necessarily agree. I think that although reading the ideology cards has a feel of party game to it, it's actually a resource kind of control game, and also a very tactical area control game. And essentially, I think if you play it with people who treat it like a party game, then you're going to stomp them, because it's a very mean, brutal, swingy area control game at its core.
Yeah, it'll also be a really divisive game. As you can imagine, some people will play this and have the best time ever with all of the table talk and the interactivity, whereas other people will despise everything that it is with its randomness and take that elements. The ideology cards are the why of the comparison to a party game, as the questions posed often provide great heated discussion around the table. Although some of the responses can get a bit over the top, the questions that they ask are really interesting, and you can tell that great effort has gone to adding thematic flavour to whichever campaign deck you pick. Really though, the cards are just a vehicle to provide the players with resources and powers.
The ideology cards also come with a major problem, and it's the biggest issue in Shasn, and that is randomness. Because to buy voters, to put them on a board, you need very specific resources, because each voter card has a specific cost. But you're not in control of what resources you get. They're kind of dictated to you by the ideology cards. And most of them only have kind of majority of one resource on them, and then one of another resource. And because you're not in control, and sometimes you can kind of guess maybe what ideology the card is leaning towards depending on the answer, and sometimes you're wrong. So at worst, it leads to turns where you can't do anything because your resources don't match what you need to do anything, and then it's very boring. And on the flip side is players can luck in to getting the same ideology card over and over, which then allows them to get powers. And that can also be quite imbalancing when you have some players with level 3 and level 5 powers and other players without them, because particularly the level 5 powers, they can really mess around with voters, and you can end up in particularly kind of gruesome situations where if I don't have a level 5 power and the other players do, I can put out 4 voters on my turn, and by the time it comes around again, they can have easily removed or swapped out or generally gotten rid of those voters. So I'm kind of just treading water, which obviously is not fun. What I will say is that I wonder if it's more that all of this feels particularly frustrating when you are unable to kind of retaliate, but that it doesn't necessarily affect the kind of final scores. At least in our games, you know, the first game I never got a level 5 power. The other 2 players got them mid-game. But I did end up 1 point behind the winner. So although I had a lot of, you could say, negative turns where they punched down on me, it didn't necessarily affect anything. So I think we'll need to play more to have a kind of final decision on that. But this will be the point that I think will really be frustrating for most people and might turn them off of the game.
Once you have voters, the area control will begin, and this is where Shasn really shines. The game will start off simple with players carving out their own corners, maybe partaking in a bit of gerrymandering, but things really escalate when the level 5 powers and conspiracy cards come into play. These powers let players move or remove previously unassailable majority voters, meaning that a player can go from a majority position of safety to having no majority at all by their next turn.
It's wild, unpredictable, and chaotic. And this is because the powers are a little bananas, but in a good way. You know, we are big fans of the powers that each ideology has, particularly level 5 powers, because it just adds this element of craziness and insanity to the game. And on top of that, we really appreciate the kind of additional little mechanisms they layer in the area control, such as volatile areas. These areas here on the board where you can place a voter and they are safe forever. Basically, nothing can affect them. However, you have to draw a headline card, which is pretty much always bad news. So do you take the trade-off? It just creates this kind of tense, tight battlefield where no one can ever truly feel safe, and it's really thrilling to play. There is one particularly strong opinion I have on this game, and it's that I personally wouldn't play it without using the home territories module, an optional module you can use or not use, where each territory gets a distinct power or drawback that basically will affect or can be used by whoever has gerrymandering rights in that region. Now, I think it really zhuzhes up the game, but it does add complexity as well. So if you're trying to keep this more of a light party game, as we've talked about, then you probably don't want to use it. But if you're more of a gamer, I think you'll definitely will want to use it. And essentially, it does a couple of interesting things. The first is it provides an alternate route for players who maybe haven't lucked into their ideology powers. It gives people different elements to take advantage of and kind of carve their route through to try to win the game. Also, it creates really interesting game states, such as in our game, we had basically a territory that had a very negative effect. So nobody wanted to go there, and it artificially shrunk the map, making things more brutal until the end of the game when people were desperate for majority voters and went there. So all in all, I can fully recommend it. And what's particularly interesting is that these tiles flip after being used or activated. So then on the other side and on your next turn, there's a different problem to deal with or a different power to make use of.
Overall, Shasn is a highly interactive, tactical, opportunistic experience with a lot of take that and players griefing one another. It's given us the most emotions playing a board game, i.e. hatred, anger, since Arcs.
As such, you're going to need a group who is okay with that sort of gameplay and maybe the animosity the game is going to drag up in your game group. But on top of that, you'll also need a game group who can deal with the ideology cards and the questions and the propositions they're putting towards you, as well as sometimes the flippant attitude towards serious issues. Definitely not one to be pulling out at a con, in particular because it's overlong. And that's probably the most common criticism you're going to see of Shasn, that it is a long game. And in particular, I think it's because of a very slow start, which is maybe my least favorite element of the game. And this just becomes because at the start, people don't have their powers, they don't have their resource generation from collecting cards. And you do have some very slow kind of rounds where all you're really doing is reading out the ideology cards. Final thoughts. With all its different elements, Shasn is quite a hard game to summarize. But I think what we would say first is something you said, which is that it's unique in our collection.
Yeah, 100%. It's really not comparable to anything else. And elements of it are obviously kind of borrowed from other games, but altogether, it's just very novel and, like you said, hard to describe, because in some ways it does feel like that kind of party game vibe at the beginning when you ask the questions. And to me, sometimes I'm never sure if I'm supposed to answer for myself or to try and answer as if I'm the character in the game. So it puts you in this like weird headspace. It's also can be incredibly frustrating, but I think that's just kind of part of the game. And we like mean, brutal games, so that's all part of the fun for us. But overall, I did really enjoy it, and I look forward to playing some more of it, actually.
Yeah, so I pretty much agree. I think, like I said, I think there's definitely going to be times where you feel frustration while playing, at least we did. But I also not sure how much it matters when it comes to the end of the game. I think things do tend to balance out. And I also, as I said earlier, I do think the home territories go a long way to making it a more robust game as well. I think they make it more interesting, and it kind of will alleviate some of that randomness because you have other things to aim for. But yeah, I mean, we had a lot of fun playing this. I think it was very unique. Some people are going to despise this and should stay away from it. Other people are going to really enjoy it. And I also am really looking forward to playing some more, trying some more of the decks.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think something that puts it in a little bit of a weird space as well is the length of time.
Yes.
Because you would just think that something like this would be a bit shorter, but the games we played did go on for a number of hours. Yeah. So again, it fits in this kind of weird space. So just something to be aware of there.
Yeah. But I think there's a lot to recommend it. I mean, the production is obviously brilliant.
Amazing.
There's a lot of replayability, I think. There's been some talk that obviously you have the decks, but in one game, we maybe went through kind of half, a bit less of a deck. And then I just think that, if you have multiple and you can buy more, there is like a lot of replayability and it's a long game. So how much are you really going to play it, when it's that long? So I think, if the positives that we've said sound good to you, then we definitely recommend it.
Yeah.
But if, you're worried about the frustration or just many different elements that might be worrisome, then it probably won't be for you. So that was our review of Shasn. Please ask us any questions you might have. We're going to be coming back with a review of the standalone expansion in the near future. And please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.